The phone buzzed at 2:37 a.m. Skylar's voice, tight with emotion, sliced through the darkness. "Mom, I'm at the precinct. Darius hit me and then he filed a report saying I attacked him. They believe him, not me." I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, trying to center myself. Then she said something that made every muscle in my body clench. "There's an officer here. He's acting strange. He keeps looking at me like he recognizes me." I was out of bed in an instant. No lights, no hesitation. I started the car, the empty streets blurring into a black smear beneath the tires. Skylar was still on the phone, her breathing shallow and uneven, trying to hold back the sobs. "Darius has a cut on his arm, Mom. He told them I attacked him with a knife. There's blood on his shirt. He looks like the perfect victim." My grip on the steering wheel tightened, my knuckles bone white. I knew this scenario. I had seen it played out countless times. The abuser masquerading as the victim painted as the criminal. But I never imagined I would hear those words coming from my own daughter. "Which precinct?" I asked, my voice as sharp and cold as tempered steel. 10th Street, she choked out between sobs. 10th Street. My heart skipped a beat, a jolt of adrenaline. That precinct, that district. I pressed harder on the accelerator. The red light in front of me seemed insignificant. I blew right through it. The deserted streets of the sleeping city had no right to keep me. Not tonight. Not when my daughter was being held in a room while her abuser was walking around with a fake wound and a carefully constructed story. I made it there in 12 minutes. It should have taken at least 20. I didn't care. I double-parked right in front of the entrance, abandoning the car. The harsh fluorescent lights of the precinct cut through the night like sharp blades. I pushed open the glass door. The air inside reeked of stale coffee and a thick, suffocating fear. A young officer was sitting behind the desk. He looked up as I came in. The moment he saw me, something changed in his face. He visibly paled. His hand froze halfway to the keyboard. His eyes widened as if he'd seen a ghost walk through the door. "Excuse me," he stammered, the words catching in his throat. He seemed to lose his train of thought. I just stared at him, saying nothing, letting the silence stretch. In those endless seconds, I saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. I saw his hands tremble almost imperceptibly. I saw recognition dawn in his eyes, followed by fear. "Officer," I finally said, my voice filling the silent space like a judge handing down a sentence. "I am here for my daughter Skylar Hayes, and you are going to explain to me exactly what is going on here." Officer Miles, according to the name tag pinned to his chest, jumped to his feet so quickly that his chair rolled backward, crashing into the wall. "Judge Estelle," he whispered, his eyes wide. "Judge." It had been 5 years since anyone had called me that. 5 years since I had left the bench, but he remembered me. His eyes flickered nervously between my face and the hallway leading to the holding rooms. I knew my presence had triggered something in his memory, set off an internal alarm. "I didn't know the detainee was your daughter," he went on, his voice softening. "The husband filed the report first. He came in bleeding, claiming she attacked him. We have protocol." "Protocol," I repeated, the word feeling like poison in my mouth. I took a step toward the counter. Miles instinctively recoiled. "Where is my daughter now?" He pointed a shaky hand down the hall. "Waiting room. We haven't officially booked her yet. Captain Cole is personally reviewing the case. He and Mr. Croft, they're acquainted." Of course they were. Men like Darius always had friends in influential places. They always knew the captain, the judge, the prosecutor. They always had a network to protect them while their victims drowned in silence. "Take me to her," I ordered. Miles hesitated, glancing toward a closed door at the end of the hallway. Behind that door were the captain and most likely Darius, verbally crafting their version of events, solidifying the official story, deciding Skylar's fate while she sat alone, terrified, trying to understand how her life had become this nightmare. "Now, officer," I insisted, and this time there was no room for argument. Miles nodded, his face pale. He led me down the hall. Our footsteps echoed off the gray walls. Each sound brought back memories of the countless hallways I'd walked, the thousands of cases I'd presided over, the thousands of women I had tried to help. But I never imagined I'd be walking this hallway for my own daughter. Miles opened a door and there was Skylar sitting in a plastic chair, curled in on herself, hugging her knees. She looked up when we came in. Her eyes were swollen, red-rimmed, all the hope drained out of them. But when she saw me, something broke on her face. "Mom," she whispered, and she stumbled to her feet, running toward me. I wrapped my arms around her as she collapsed against me. I felt her body shaking with sobs, and I felt something else, something that sent a cold shiver through me. Bruises. As she clung to me, I saw the dark edge of a bruise peeking out from under the sleeve of her sweater. It wasn't fresh, not from tonight. It was from days, maybe weeks ago. I gently pulled the fabric back. Skylar tried to cover herself, but it was too late. I saw the bruises creeping up her arm like a map of violence. Dark finger marks, angry red lines where someone had gripped her too tightly, again and again. "Skylar," I whispered, my voice breaking for the first time. "How long?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I couldn't tell you, Mom. I just couldn't. You've been a judge your whole life, helping women like me. I didn't want you to think I'd failed, that I was stupid, that I didn't see the signs." I closed my eyes, fighting back the wave of emotions. The pain in her voice was almost unbearable. I held her tighter. "You didn't fail," I whispered into her ear. "He failed. The system is failing right now, but I am not going to fail you." I pulled away from her and looked at Miles, who was still standing in the doorway, watching the scene with a look of discomfort on his face. "Officer," I said, wiping tears from my eyes with the back of my hand, "I need to see the complaint report. I need to see Darius Croft, and I need to speak with Captain Cole." Miles swallowed hard again. "Judge Estelle, I remember your face because you saved my sister 10 years ago. Morales versus Morales case. You issued the protection order that saved her life. I was 19 and I was in the courtroom when you sentenced that man." Silence fell like a stone. Miles looked at me, his expression a mixture of reverence and guilt. "I didn't know Miss Hayes was your daughter when they brought her in," he continued. "Darius arrived first, bleeding, calm, convincing. He said she went crazy, that she attacked him for no reason, that she needed psychiatric help. Captain Cole knows him from the country club. They were having coffee while they waited for us to bring your daughter in." Every word was like a nail being hammered into place. Every detail confirmed what I already knew. The system was rigged to believe men like Darius. "Where is he now?" I asked. Miles pointed to the office door down the hall. "In the captain's office, giving his official statement." I turned back to Skylar. I took her face in my hands. "Look at me," I said. She obeyed, her eyes full of terror and shame. "This night ends differently. Do you hear me? This is not going to be like those other cases you've watched fall apart. I know every trick, every lie, every manipulation. I know exactly how to dismantle them." Something flickered in her gaze. A tiny spark, fragile as glass. Hope. I turned toward the door, toward the hallway, toward the office where Darius was building his castle of lies. I started walking. Miles followed me. "Judge, the captain won't," he began to say. I cut him off without turning around. "Captain Cole is going to hear me out, and when I am done, he is going to wish he had never shared a cup of coffee with Darius Croft." My footsteps echoed, firm and determined. 34 years of experience walked with me. 34 years of knowing every loophole in the law, every weakness in a false accusation. I reached the office door. I didn't bother knocking. Pushed it open. Captain Cole looked up from behind his desk. Darius was sitting across from him, leaning back in his chair as if he were in his own living room. Immaculate white dress shirt, black slacks, a watch that probably cost more than $5,000 gleaming on his wrist, a clean, perfectly placed bandage on his left forearm. He looked tired, concerned, the picture of a victim. When he saw me, a series of expressions flickered across his face. Surprise, then calculation, then that smile. That practiced, condescending smile that I had seen before on other men who thought they could manipulate any situation. "Estelle," he said, standing up with feigned courtesy. "I didn't expect to see you here." His voice was smooth, controlled like velvet wrapped around steel. "How could I not be here?" I replied, closing the door behind me. "My daughter is being detained because you beat her, and then you had the audacity to file a false report." Cole stood up too, raising his hands as if to defuse a situation that was only just beginning to escalate. "Estelle, I understand this is difficult, but there are procedures. Darius came in first. He has an injury. There's protocol to follow." "Protocol?" I repeated, walking toward the desk. "Let's talk about protocol then. Cole, did you conduct a full forensic body examination of my daughter? Did you check her for injuries? Did you photograph her wounds or just that superficial cut on Darius's arm?" The captain blinked, his mouth slightly agape. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was in his silence. Darius cleared his throat. "Estelle, I know you're her mother, and this must be terrible for you. But Skylar is not well. She's been under a lot of stress lately. She lost control tonight. I was only trying to defend myself." I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the performance, the carefully rehearsed posture, the eyes pleading for sympathy, the measured gestures of his hands. This man had practiced. He knew exactly how to appear innocent, how to sound reasonable, how to twist the violence he had committed into an episode of madness on the part of his victim. "How long have you been planning this, Darius?" I asked, my voice cold as ice. "How long have you been preparing this story? A week? A month? Since when did you decide that if Skylar ever tried to leave, you'd turn her into a criminal?" His mask wavered just for a split second, but I saw it. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, his voice now with an edge. "I'm here because my wife attacked me with a knife. I have the injury. I have witnesses who heard the commotion. I have the right to file a report." I stepped closer. Cole tried to intervene, but I ignored him. "Witnesses?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "Which witnesses, Darius? The neighbors who called the police? The same ones who have heard screaming coming from your condo for months? Those witnesses?" The color drained from his face, subtly, almost imperceptibly, but it was there. "The neighbors have nothing to do with this," he stammered. I smiled, but it was not a pleasant smile. "Oh, but they do have everything to do with it. Because when Miles goes to take their statements, they are going to tell a very different story from yours. They're going to talk about the nights they heard Skylar begging you to stop. They're going to talk about the pounding against the walls, the broken dishes, the day they saw her with a black eye, and you said she had fallen down." Darius sat down abruptly. The mask was beginning to crack, the carefully constructed facade starting to crumble. Cole cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "Estelle, I appreciate your concern, but this is not a courtroom. You can't just come in here and interrogate." "I can't." I cut him off, turning to face him directly. "Cole, I've known you for 20 years. We've shared cases. We worked together when you were just an officer. So, I'm going to tell you something I hope you remember. If you process my daughter without doing a complete investigation, without examining her, without taking statements from all the witnesses, I will sue you personally, and then I will make sure every judge, every prosecutor, every officer in this city knows that you let your friendship with an abuser cloud your judgment." The silence in that office was absolute. Cole stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and disbelief. Darius had lost all composure. His jaw was clenched tight, and his hands were gripping the armrests of the chair. "This is intimidation," he hissed. "No," I replied calmly. "This is justice. Something you have avoided for a long time." I turned back to Miles, who was still in the doorway, his face pale. "Officer, I need you to do something for me. I need you to take Skylar to the hospital right now. Full forensic body exam, photographs of all her injuries, detailed medical report." Miles looked at Cole, seeking direction. The captain was frozen, caught between loyalty to his friend and the weight of the situation crashing down around him. He didn't know what to do. His comfortable version of events was falling apart before his eyes. "Do it," Cole finally said, his voice weak and strained. Miles nodded quickly and left the room. Darius stood up abruptly, his face contorted with rage. "This is ridiculous. I'm the victim here. I have a real wound. Skylar is making things up." "Making up what?" I interrupted him, my voice dangerously low. "The bruises that are weeks old, the ribs that are probably fractured, the burns on her back." I watched his eyes widen, a flicker of panic in their depths. I had said too much. I had mentioned the burns, something he thought no one knew about, something Skylar had hidden even from me until tonight. "How?" he began to ask, then stopped himself. Too late. Cole had noticed it too. "Burns?" the captain asked slowly, his gaze shifting between Darius and me. Darius quickly regained his composure, forcing his features into a mask of innocence. "I don't know what she's talking about. She's inventing things to protect her daughter." But the crack was there, and I was determined to widen it into an abyss. I pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't used in months. It answered on the third ring. "Jordan," I said. "My oldest daughter, Skylar's sister." "Mom, what's going on?" "It's 3 in the morning." Her voice sounded drowsy, confused. "Jordan, I need you to come to the 10th Street precinct now. Skylar is here. Darius hit her and filed a false report. I need you to bring something." There was a pause, followed by the sound of movement. Bed sheets rustling. Quick footsteps. "What do you need?" she asked, her voice now hard and focused. "The flash drive. The one Skylar gave you 2 months ago. The one she asked you to hold on to." Another silence, heavier this time. "Mom, how do you know about that?" "Because I know my daughter," I replied. "Because I know that women in situations like this always find ways to protect themselves. They always leave hidden evidence. They always have an escape plan. Bring it now." I hung up. Darius was ashen-faced. "What flash drive?" he asked, his voice trembling despite his efforts to control it. I smiled again, a predatory gleam in my eyes. "The one with the recordings, Darius. The recordings Skylar made over the last 3 months. Every time you threatened her, every time you hit her, every time you told her no one would believe her over you. It was a bluff. I didn't know for certain that the flash drive existed. But I knew the pattern. I knew how survivors operated. And I knew Skylar. My daughter was intelligent. Scared, yes. Trapped, yes, but intelligent. And by the look on Darius's face, I knew I had guessed right. That is illegal," he stammered, desperate now. "Recording without consent is admissible evidence in domestic violence cases," I interrupted, completing his sentence. "You would know that if you paid attention to the laws instead of looking for ways to break them." Cole sank heavily into his chair, his face pale. He was finally understanding. He was finally seeing what was right in front of him. A man who had orchestrated everything, who had cut himself, who had come in first to control the narrative, who had leveraged his connections to ensure his version of events became the official one. "Darius," the captain said slowly, his voice heavy with disappointment, "I think you need to call your lawyer." Darius looked at him with disbelief, his carefully constructed world starting to crumble around him. "What?" "Cole, we're friends. We play golf every Thursday. You know my character. You know I wouldn't." "I don't know anything," Cole interrupted him, and for the first time that night, I heard real authority in his voice. "And that's the problem." The door burst open. Miles rushed in. "Captain, the ambulance is here to take Miss Hayes to the hospital. The paramedics say she has visible signs of trauma. Bruising in different stages of healing, possible fractured ribs, ligature marks on her wrists." Every word was a hammer blow, shattering Darius's carefully constructed reality. Darius slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him. His perfect world, his perfect plan was disintegrating before our eyes. "Also," Miles continued, glancing at me briefly, "the neighbors from apartments 203 and 205 are here. They said they heard the call on the radio and wanted to give their statements." They said it's important. Cole nodded, looking exhausted. Let them in. Two people entered. An older woman in a housecoat and a tired-looking man in his 50s. I recognized them as residents of Schuyler's building. The woman, Miss Evelyn Tate, spoke without preamble. We came to tell the truth. That man, she pointed directly at Darius, has been abusing that poor girl for months. We've heard everything. The screams, the banging, the begging. We called the police 3 times, Miss Tate continued, her voice trembling with anger. But every time you arrived, he said everything was fine and you left. The man, Mr. Leonard Bell, nodded in agreement. Tonight was different. We heard glass break. We heard Schuyler scream that he was going to kill her. Then silence. Then we saw him leave with his arm bleeding, but walking calmly like nothing had happened. That's not the behavior of someone who just got attacked. That's the behavior of someone executing a plan. Darius stood up abruptly, his face red with rage. You don't know anything. You weren't inside the apartment. You didn't see. We saw enough, the woman interrupted him, her voice firm despite her fear. And this time we are not going to be silent. Darius opened his mouth to reply, but Cole raised his hand, silencing him. Enough, the captain said, rubbing his temples. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 20 minutes. Miles, take complete statements from these witnesses. Every detail, every date they remember, every call they made. He turned to Darius, his expression grim. And you stay here. You are not going anywhere until this is sorted out. I watched Darius's mask finally crumble completely. The elegant composure evaporated, replaced by raw, unadulterated rage and fear. This is a conspiracy, he spat, his voice shaking. You're all against me because she, he pointed a trembling finger at me, is a former judge. She has influence. She's manipulating you. No, I said, my voice calm but with a chilling edge. You are the one who manipulates. I am only exposing the truth. I walked out of the office. I didn't need to see any more. Darius could scream all he wanted. His words no longer held any power. The evidence would speak for him, and the evidence never lies. I walked down the hall to where they had taken Schuyler. Paramedics were loading her onto a stretcher. She looked so small, so fragile, lying there with her eyes closed. I walked over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. I'm coming with you, I told her, my voice soft but firm. She nodded, gripping my fingers tightly, just like when she was a child and was afraid of thunderstorms. The hospital was only 12 minutes away. Schuyler didn't speak during the ride. She just stared at the ceiling of the ambulance, her eyes blank and distant. I held her hand the whole way. The paramedic, a young man around 30, checked her vitals, his expression serious. How long? He asked me quietly, his voice full of concern. I didn't need to ask what he meant. I don't know, I answered honestly. Months, maybe more than a year. He nodded, making a note on his tablet. I've seen a lot of cases like this, he said. This one is bad. The injuries in different stages of healing indicate a sustained pattern of abuse. We arrived at the emergency room. The bright lights assaulted my eyes like a slap. They took Schuyler directly to an examination room. A middle-aged doctor with her hair pulled back, Dr. Amani Jones, entered almost immediately. I'm Dr. Jones, she said, glancing at me briefly before focusing her attention on Schuyler. I'm going to do a complete exam. She turned to Schuyler. Is it okay if your mother stays here? Schuyler nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Yes, I want her to stay. The doctor began the examination. Every time she discovered a new injury, her expression hardened. Bruises on her arms, on her ribs, on her back. Circular marks on her wrists, where something had been tied tightly around them. And the burns, small round scars on her lower back. Old cigarette burns. Schuyler winced slightly when the doctor touched them gently. When was this? The doctor asked, her voice professional but laced with compassion. 3 months ago, Schuyler murmured, her eyes downcast. He was mad because dinner wasn't ready when he got home. He said he needed to teach me discipline. I closed my eyes, fighting back a surge of nausea. Every word was like a dagger twisting in my heart. Every revelation showed me how blind I had been. How many signs I had missed. How many times Skylar had sat across from me, smiling, lying, protecting me from the truth. Because she didn't want to disappoint me. Dr. Jones photographed every injury, documenting everything meticulously. "I'm going to order x-rays," she said finally, breaking the silence. "I need to check the ribs and I want you to talk to our social worker." She left the room, leaving Skylar and me alone. The silence was dense, heavy, suffocating. "I'm sorry, Mom," Skylar whispered, her voice barely audible. "I should have told you sooner." I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Don't apologize," I said softly. "None of this is your fault." I sat down on the edge of the bed, my heart aching. "Why didn't you tell me, Skylar? Why did you let it go on for so long?" Tears streamed down her cheeks, silent and unending. "Because you've saved so many women throughout your career. You've dedicated your life to protecting domestic violence victims. And I became one of them. I felt so ashamed, so stupid. I thought if I told you, you would look at me differently. You would think I had failed, that I hadn't learned anything from you." Her voice broke with a sob, and she buried her face in her hands. I hugged her, being careful not to press where there might be bruises. "Listen to me," I told her firmly, my voice full of love and reassurance. "You didn't fail. He failed. The system failed. I failed for not seeing what was happening. But you survived. And that takes more strength than most people have in their whole lives." The door burst open. Jordan rushed into the room like a hurricane, her hair messy, a coat thrown on over her pajamas. In her hand she held a small black flash drive. Skylar gasped, her eyes widening with surprise and relief. Jordan ran to the bed and hugged her sister so tightly that they both cried. "I brought it," Jordan said, showing me the flash drive. "I didn't listen to all of it. I couldn't. But there are hours of recordings. Skylar gave it to me 2 months ago. She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I would give it to the police." I took the flash drive in my hand. It was light, so small, but it held the weight of months of terror. "Why didn't you come to me with this before?" I asked Skylar, my voice gentle. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her eyes full of fear and regret. "Because I was afraid. Darius always said that if I left him, if I tried to report him, he would destroy me. He said he had contacts, that no one would believe me. That he was Darius Croft, a respected businessman, and I was just his unstable wife. He threatened that if I spoke up, I'd lose absolutely everything. My job, my family, my freedom." She took a shaky breath and continued. "Tonight he lost control more than ever before. He broke a glass bottle, cutting his own arm in the process. Then I saw something in his eyes, a look that told me he was going to kill me. So, for the first time in months, I fought back. I really fought for my life. And his wound?" I asked, interrupting. Skylar looked down, avoiding my gaze. "I tried to take the broken glass away from him. He cut himself during the struggle. It wasn't deep, barely a scratch, really. But when he saw the blood, he smiled, Mom. He actually smiled and said, 'Now I'm going to the police. I'm going to tell them you attacked me. And when they arrest you, you'll finally learn your place.'" She shivered at the memory. He called the police, who arrived within 8 minutes. By then, he'd already bandaged his arm and thoroughly rehearsed his story. The officers took one look at him in his suit, so calm and collected, and then at me, trembling and crying. I just knew they were going to believe him. Jordan squeezed her sister's hand in support. "But he didn't count on Mom," she added. She smiled through her tears, because no one ever counts on Estelle Hayes when someone hurts her family. I put the flash drive in my pocket. "I'm going back to the precinct. I need to give them this. I need to make sure Darius doesn't leave until he's properly processed." Skylar sat up quickly, her eyes wide with panic. "Mom, he has a lawyer, Randall Quinn. He's the best defense attorney in the city. He called him even before you arrived. He's going to get out." "He's going to?" "He is not getting out. I said with absolute certainty, cutting her off. Not this time. I kissed her forehead reassuringly. Jordan is staying with you. You are not alone anymore. I left the room, stepping into the quiet hospital hallway. It was almost 5 o'clock in the morning. I immediately called Miles. He answered right away. Judge Estelle, I have additional evidence, I stated. Recordings. Is Darius still there? There was a brief pause on the other end. Yes, he is. His lawyer, Randall Quinn, arrived 20 minutes ago. He's demanding we release his client, claiming there's no probable cause. He argues that Darius's injury is sufficient evidence of assault, and that the neighbor's testimonies are merely circumstantial. Of course, Randall Quinn, I said, recognizing the name. Slick, expensive, and completely immoral. He defends anyone who can afford his exorbitant $1,000 per hour fee. Tell Cole I'm on my way. Tell him not to process anything until I get there. I hung up the phone. The dawn was just starting to break on the horizon. I got into my car. The city streets were beginning to wake up. Early morning workers, delivery trucks, the city slowly returning to life. But I was still very much at war, and the battle was far from over. I arrived at the precinct as the sun barely began to paint the sky with shades of orange and pink. The streets smelled of fresh-baked bread coming from the corner bakery. A scene of normal life, with normal people starting their normal days. Meanwhile, I was walking back into that very building where my daughter had been treated like a criminal, and where her abuser had been drinking coffee with the captain as if they were old friends. I pushed open the glass door. The shift had changed. There were new officers at the front desk, but Miles was still there. He saw me enter, and something in his expression told me the situation had worsened significantly. Judge, he said in a low voice, quickly approaching me. Randall Quinn is really pressing hard. He's threatened to sue the department for illegal detention. He's claiming that Darius is the real victim here, and that we're being influenced by his personal connection to you. I gripped the flash drive in my pocket even tighter. Where are they? Miles pointed toward the same office as before. Cole is with them. He looks bad, Judge. Randall is really good at what he does. He's dismantling every single argument. He says the neighbors only heard noises, didn't actually see anything. He also says Skylar's injuries could be self-inflicted or from another incident entirely, and that the only clear physical evidence is the small cut on Darius's arm. I started walking toward the office, my footsteps echoing like harsh sentences. Miles nervously followed me. There's something else, he added. Randall already contacted a friendly judge. He has a preliminary release order ready to sign if we don't file solid charges within the next 2 hours. 2 hours. The very system designed to protect the innocent was now being used to potentially free the guilty. I opened the office door without bothering to knock. Randall Quinn was standing next to Darius, looking elegant in his dark gray suit that probably cost around $3,000. His hair was perfectly combed, and he held a leather briefcase on the desk. He looked at me with those calculating eyes that I had seen in far too many lawyers, the kind who prioritize profit over justice. Estelle Hayes, he said with a practiced, professional smile. I should have figured you'd be involved. Your daughter attacks my client, and somehow you're trying to turn this into a media circus. His tone was condescending and calm, as if he were talking down to an irrational child. Your client, I replied, my voice like steel, beat my daughter for months, and tonight he tried to kill her. Then he cut himself to create a false alibi. Randall laughed softly, a professional laugh meant to dismiss my words. Those are very serious accusations, Judge. Do you have any actual proof? Because right now, I have an injured client and a wife with a supposed history of erratic behavior, according to him. And there's absolutely zero forensic evidence to support your narrative. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and placed it on Cole's desk with a sharp thump. Here's your proof. Silence fell over the room like a tombstone. Randall looked at the flash drive, his expression unreadable. Darius visibly paled. What is that? The lawyer asked, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Recordings, I stated. Months and months of secret recordings that Skylar made. Every threat, every blow, every single time your client told her that if she ever left him he would destroy her. Every single time he told her that no one would ever believe her because he was Darius Croft and she was nobody. Darius abruptly stood up, looking panicked. Those recordings are illegal. They can't be used. I didn't give my consent. Randall raised his hand to try and silence him, but it was already too late. Cole connected the flash drive to his computer. In domestic violence cases, the captain said slowly, his eyes fixed on the screen, recordings made by victims in their own home are perfectly admissible as evidence, especially when there is reasonable fear for their safety. He clicked the play button. Darius's voice filled the cold office, sounding cruel and completely different from the educated, composed man who had been sitting there just moments ago. If you tell anyone, Skylar, you are going to seriously regret it. You think your mother is going to save you? You think anyone is going to believe me? A respected businessman versus you, a hysterical wife? The sound of something breaking filled the room, followed by a choked scream. Shut up. Shut up. Or it's going to be so much worse for you. More sounds followed, thumps and sobs. This is all your fault. Everything is always your fault. If you were a better wife, I wouldn't have to do this. Cole paused the recording, his face ashen. Randall had completely lost his elegant composure. There's more. I stated, hours more. Different dates, all time-stamped, all verifiable. Randall quickly regained his footing, attempting to regain control of the situation. This could all be edited and manipulated. We'll need a proper forensic audio verification. Of course, I agreed. And while they're verifying it, Darius remains detained without bail because we just heard direct death threats. And because we have medical evidence that perfectly matches the dates on the recordings, and because we have witnesses who can confirm this pattern of abuse. I looked directly at Darius. He was visibly shaking. The mask had completely fallen away. He was no longer the respectable businessman. He was simply a scared man who knew his carefully constructed world was about to collapse around him. Anything to say now, Darius? He opened his mouth to speak, then quickly closed it, thinking better of it. His eyes darted back and forth between Randall, Cole, and me, desperately searching for some kind of escape. But there was none to be found. I want to talk to my lawyer privately, he mumbled finally. Cole nodded in agreement. Miles, take Mr. Croft to the interrogation room. Mr. Quinn, you can accompany him. Once they had both left, the captain collapsed into his chair, looking exhausted and deeply ashamed. Estelle, I honestly didn't know. Darius and I play golf together. He always seemed like a genuinely good guy. I never would have imagined. You never imagined, I interrupted him sharply. Because you didn't want to see. Because it was so much easier to believe the man in the expensive suit than the scared woman. Cole rubbed his face wearily. You're right. I failed. I should have ordered a complete exam right from the very beginning. I should have listened to the neighbors months ago when they called to complain. I should have. You should have, I agreed. But now you have a chance to correct it. Process Darius fully. File all the charges. Aggravated assault, felony battery, threats, continuous domestic abuse. And make sure he doesn't get bail. He nodded slowly. I will. I'm going to call the assistant district attorney on duty right now. He immediately picked up the phone. With this overwhelming evidence, there's absolutely no way a judge is going to grant him freedom. As he dialed the number, I looked out the window. The sun was already high in the sky. A new day had officially begun. But I felt like I had lived an entire week in a single night. My phone suddenly vibrated. It was Jordan. Mom, the x-rays came back. Skylar has 2 fractured ribs, an old fracture in her wrist that never healed properly, an old head trauma. The doctor says it's all consistent with repeated blows over the course of months. I closed my eyes tightly. Every word she spoke was confirmation of my very worst nightmares. How is she? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sedated. They gave her something for the pain and shock. She's sleeping now. But Mom, she told me something before she drifted off. She said Darius has videos of her in compromising situations. Says he drugged her and recorded her without her knowledge, and that he uses them to blackmail her. He threatened to put them online if she ever left him. The rage I felt in that very moment was like molten lava. Pure, burning, and utterly destructive. Where are those videos, Jordan? On his computer in his home office. Skylar says he keeps them there as insurance. I hung up with Jordan and immediately turned back to Cole. I need a search warrant for Darius's condo and his office. Now. The captain looked up, surprised. Why? Because there's more evidence. Evidence of extortion, sexual abuse, crimes that go far beyond simple physical violence. Cole swallowed hard, his expression grim. He nodded slowly. I'll call the duty judge right away. 30 minutes later we had the search warrant in hand. Miles and 2 other officers prepared to head to the condo. I'm going with you, I said firmly. Miles seemed to hesitate for a moment. Judge, technically, you're an interested party. Your presence could potentially compromise the investigation. I don't care. I interrupted him, my voice leaving no room for argument. That is the house where my daughter was tortured. I am going. He didn't try to argue any further. We got into the patrol cars and headed to the building where Skylar had lived her nightmare. A very nice, modern high-rise with a doorman and manicured gardens. No one would ever imagine the horrors that had been occurring behind those closed doors. The doorman recognized us as we approached, and his expression became noticeably uncomfortable. Going to Darius Croft's apartment? Miles asked him. He nodded in response. We have a search warrant. The doorman lowered his voice, leaning in slightly. That poor lady, Miss Hayes, always so kind, always smiling. I knew he knew. The doorman always knew. We would all see her enter the building looking happy and carefree, and then leave with red, swollen eyes. We also witnessed how Darius would treat her so sweetly and lovingly in public, only to look at her with cold disdain when he thought no one was watching. He gave us the master key to the apartment. We went up in the elevator to the 12th floor, condo number 1203. The door opened, revealing an impeccable space with sleek, modern furniture, carefully chosen art on the walls, and a beautiful view of the city. A gilded cage where Skylar had been held prisoner for far too long. As I entered the apartment, the strong smell of expensive cologne immediately hit me. Everything was tidy, almost too tidy, like a stage carefully set up to impress any visitors. There were abstract paintings on the walls, a spotless area rug, and a cream-colored leather sofa that probably cost upwards of $10,000. But I didn't see luxury. All I saw was a prison. I saw the place where my daughter had suffered in silence, while the outside world thought she had the perfect life. Miles and the other officers began their systematic search of the condo. The office is back here, I said, remembering the few times I had actually visited this place. Skylar had always insisted that we meet at my house instead. Now I finally understood why. Darius's office was exactly as I had imagined it would be. A dark wood desk, shelves overflowing with books he probably never read, framed diplomas hanging on the wall, and photographs of him shaking hands with important people, politicians, businessmen, and even judges. It was a carefully cultivated network of power. Miles turned on the computer, but it was password protected. We're going to need technical support too, he started to say. Try his date of birth, I suggested. Men like Darius were predictable and arrogant. They actually believed that no one would ever dare to invade their personal space. Miles tried it, but it didn't work. Neither did their wedding anniversary. Then, I suddenly remembered something that Skylar had mentioned once. Try his company name followed by the year he founded it. Miles typed it in. The computer unlocked immediately. Of course, for Darius, his business was more important than any human relationship. Miles started going through the files, finding meticulously organized folders filled with contracts and financial documents. Then he finally found it. A hidden folder with no name, just a symbol. Miles clicked on it. My stomach twisted in knots as dozens of videos appeared on the screen. The dates on the videos went back more than a year. Don't watch them, I said quickly. Just document that they're there. We need to preserve the chain of custody. This is definitely going to trial. Miles nodded, taking photos of the screen. He immediately called the cybercrimes unit. I need you to come down here right away. We have some very sensitive digital evidence. While we waited, I continued exploring the office. I opened desk drawers and filing cabinets. In the third desk drawer, I found something that chilled me to the bone. A thick manila folder. I opened it slowly. Inside were photographs of Skylar taken without her knowledge. In the shower, sleeping, changing clothes. There were also documents. Skylar's private medical records that Darius had obtained illegally, reports from her job, and even psychological evaluations that he had manipulated to make her look unstable. Miles, I called out. He came over to where I was standing, and I showed him the contents of the folder. His expression darkened with anger. This is systematic stalking, illegal surveillance, and identity theft. This is about control, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Darius didn't just hit her. He studied her. He documented every single aspect of her life. He built a complete file to use against her if she ever tried to escape. I also found more copies of emails exchanged between Darius and Randall Quinn from about 6 months ago. In those emails, Darius discussed various strategies to discredit Skylar if she ever became problematic. They talked about planting doubts about her mental stability, creating false evidence of infidelity, and even using his connections to ruin her professional reputation. It was a plan, a detailed and carefully calculated plan designed to destroy her completely. The cybercrimes technicians finally arrived and began the process of copying the entire hard drive. Every file, every document, every video. One of them, a young woman with a serious expression on her face, approached me. Ma'am, what's on this computer is definitely enough for multiple federal charges. Extortion, non-consensual pornography, and cyberstalking. This man is a systematic predator. I nodded slowly. I knew it. I always knew it on some level. But having the physical evidence right in front of me made it so much different. It was real and it was irrefutable. How long do you need for the full analysis? I asked. Days, she replied. But to extract the basics and file initial charges, just a few hours. I walked out of the office. I needed to get some air. I stepped out onto the balcony and looked out at the view. The city spread out before me like a living map. From up here, everything looked orderly and perfect, but I knew the truth. Behind every window and every door, there were countless stories. Some happy, others dark, just like Skylar's. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Cole. Estelle, Darius is demanding to see a judge. Randall is filing a motion for habeas corpus, claiming that his detention is illegal. I smiled without any humor. Tell Randall we have additional evidence. Videos, documents, and a premeditated plan of abuse and extortion. And tell him that, in the next few hours, his client is going to face federal charges in addition to the state ones. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Cole sighed. Darius just broke. When we told him about the search warrant, he started screaming, saying that everything on that computer was private, and that we had absolutely no right to seize it. Randall tried to silence him, but he just kept talking. He essentially confessed that there was compromising material on the computer without us even having to ask him. I laughed, a bitter sound. Criminals always betray themselves. Always. Keep the recording of that spontaneous confession. Randall will undoubtedly try to suppress it, but with any luck, the judge will admit it as evidence. I hung up the phone. Miles came out to join me on the balcony. Everything is documented. The computer is being sent to the lab, and the physical documents are being logged into evidence. Good, I said. Let's go back. I want to be there when they formally process Darius. We went back downstairs. The doorman stopped us in the lobby. Did you find anything? He asked in a low voice. I probably shouldn't have answered him since it was still an active investigation, but something in his expression compelled me to speak. We found enough to ensure that he never hurts anyone again. The doorman nodded slowly. Good. That Miss Hayes deserves justice. We all knew it here, but no one did anything, myself included.
I'm ashamed.
I put a hand on his shoulder reassuringly. Now you can do something. If the case goes to trial, they're going to need witnesses, people who saw or heard something, people who can confirm the pattern of abuse. We'll tell them everything, he promised. Back at the precinct, the sun was high in the sky. I had been up all night, but I didn't feel particularly tired. I just felt a strong sense of purpose. As we entered, I could sense that the energy in the building had changed. Officers were talking in hushed voices, and there were noticeably more people present. A woman in a formal suit was standing at the front counter. She recognized me immediately. Judge Hayes, she said, extending her hand. I'm Assistant District Attorney Aisha Reynolds. Captain Cole brought me up to speed on the case. I knew her reputation: tough, smart, and with an impressive history of convictions in domestic violence cases. I need to review all the evidence, she continued. The recordings, the medical reports, and the testimonies. If this is as solid as they told me, I'm going to request detention without bail. It is solid, I assured her. And there's even more. We just seized a computer with evidence of additional felonies: extortion, revenge pornography, and systematic harassment. Aisha's eyes gleamed, not with joy but with fierce determination. Perfect. I'm going to bury this man so deep he'll never see the light of day. I liked her style. Direct and no nonsense. Where is Darius now? I asked. Interrogation room 3. Randall is with him. They're waiting for the bail hearing. Aisha checked her watch. It'll be in 2 hours, enough time for me to prepare my case. She turned to Miles. Officer, I need certified copies of everything. Every recording, every photo, every statement. I want them on my desk within the hour. I sat down in a chair in the hallway, finally feeling the weight of exhaustion begin to settle in. I closed my eyes for a moment, just for a moment, and I saw Skylar's face. Not the scared face from tonight, but her face as a child, laughing, running, and completely free. My phone vibrated, pulling me abruptly out of my thoughts. It was Jordan. Mom, Skylar woke up. She's asking for you. She wants to know what happened to Darius. I stood up immediately. Tell her I'm on my way. Tell her Darius is not getting out. Tell her that, this time, the system actually worked. I drove back to the hospital, navigating the mid-morning traffic, filled with office workers rushing to jobs they hated and mothers taking their children to school. Just normal life flowing all around my personal storm. I arrived at the hospital and went up to the 4th floor. Skylar's room was at the end of the hall. I knocked gently before entering. Skylar was sitting up in bed, still pale and still with visible marks on her face. However, her eyes held something different. No longer the desperate emptiness of the previous night. There was a faint glimmer of fragile hope beginning to appear. Jordan was sitting next to her, holding her hand tightly. Mom, Skylar said when she saw me. Her voice was raspy and tired. It's true, isn't it? They really found everything? I sat down on the other side of the bed. We found it. The recordings you made, the videos he made, the documents, everything. Darius is detained, and the prosecutor is going to ask that he be denied bail. Tears ran down her cheeks, but this time they were different. They weren't tears of fear, but of relief. I can't believe it's over, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I lived with so much fear for so long. Every morning, I woke up wondering if that would be the day he finally killed me. Every night, I fell asleep praying that I would just survive until dawn. Jordan squeezed her hand in support. You don't have to live like that anymore. Skylar nodded slowly. Then she looked at me with guilt-filled eyes. Mom, your whole life you've been helping women like me, and I couldn't even help myself. I feel so ashamed. No, I said firmly, taking her other hand. Listen to me, Skylar. What you lived through wasn't weakness. It was survival. You did what you had to do to stay alive. You recorded evidence, you gave it to Jordan, And you planned your escape even when it seemed completely impossible. That is not shame, that is strength. Skylar sobbed, her body shaking with emotion. But I should have left sooner. I really should have. There is no should have, I interrupted her gently. Abuse victims leave when they can, not when others think they should. The right moment is simply when you get out alive. And you did it. Jordan embraced both of us, creating a powerful moment between 3 generations of women. Broken but certainly not destroyed. Dr. Jones entered the room carrying a thick folder. Good morning, she said cheerfully. I just came to check on you. She proceeded to examine Skylar, checking her vitals and changing her bandages. The ribs are going to hurt for weeks. You'll need pain medication and plenty of rest, and the contusions will definitely heal, and the physical scars will eventually fade. She paused before continuing. But you're going to need professional help for the wounds that don't show. We have excellent trauma-specialized therapists here, and I highly recommend that you start seeing one as soon as possible. Skylar nodded slowly. I will. I don't want to carry this alone anymore. The doctor smiled kindly. Good. I also spoke with the social workers. There are safe shelters available if you need a place to stay while you reorganize your life, along with restraining orders and free legal assistance. You are absolutely not alone in this. She handed Skylar a comprehensive list of resources. Emergency numbers, support groups, and 24-hour crisis lines. Thank you, Skylar said in a low voice. The doctor smiled again before leaving the room. Silence filled the room once more, but it was a different kind of silence. One that wasn't heavy with fear, but instead charged with possibility and the promise of a future. My phone vibrated. It was Miles. Judge, the bail hearing is scheduled to start in 30 minutes. Aisha is ready. Are you coming? I'm coming, I replied. I looked at Skylar. The bail hearing is in half an hour. Do you want me to stay here with you? Or do you want me to go and make sure that they don't release him? Skylar took a deep breath, gathering her strength. Go. I need to know that he's not getting out, that he's not coming to find me. I kissed her forehead reassuringly. He's not getting out. I promise you. Jordan walked with me to the elevator. Mom, thank you for believing me, for fighting for me, and for not giving up on me. I hugged her tightly. It's what mothers do. They protect their daughters always. I went down to the parking lot and drove back to the courthouse. The mid-morning traffic was still dense, filled with office workers rushing to jobs they hated and mothers taking their children to school. Just normal life flowing all around me. I arrived at the courthouse, a building that felt very familiar to me. I had spent decades walking those very halls, issuing sentences and changing lives. But I had never actually been on this side of things, never as a victim's family member. The courtroom was on the 3rd floor. I walked in. Aisha was already there, busily reviewing documents. She saw me and simply nodded in acknowledgement. Darius was sitting with Randall, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, now wrinkled and unshaven. His eyes were red and bloodshot, and the mask of the successful businessman was completely gone, revealing the frightened and desperate man underneath. He saw me enter the courtroom, and a flicker of something, fear perhaps, crossed his face. Hatred. Pure hatred, but also fear. I could see him visibly swallow hard, then deliberately look away. The judge then made his entrance. All rise, the bailiff called out. Judge Sterling. I recognized him. We'd worked together many years back. Fair and strict. He didn't put up with manipulation of any kind. The state versus Darius Croft, the clerk announced in a clear voice. Aisha immediately got to her feet. Your Honor, the state requests detention without bail. The defendant is facing charges of aggravated assault, felony battery, making threats, continuous domestic abuse, extortion, cyberstalking, and non-consensual pornography. He is a clear and present danger to both the victim and the entire community. Randall rose to his feet as well. Your Honor, my client is a respected businessman with absolutely no prior criminal record. He has very deep roots in the community, He is absolutely not a flight risk. Detention without bail is excessive, and simply not warranted in this case. Judge Sterling looked down at the documents that were spread out in front of him. Prosecutor, do you have any solid evidence to back up these very serious charges? Aisha opened her briefcase and began pulling things out. I have audio recordings where the defendant explicitly threatens the victim with bodily harm and even death. I have medical reports clearly documenting injuries in different stages of healing, consistent with prolonged abuse over an extended period of time. I have neighbor testimonies confirming the pattern of abuse. I have digital evidence seized from the defendant's residence showing premeditated planning of abuse and extortion. And finally, I have forensic photographs that were taken this morning showing the severity of the most recent attack. The judge held out his hand, signaling for her to give him the evidence. Aisha handed him a folder. He began to thoroughly review it. The silence in the courtroom was now absolute. The only sound you could hear was the quiet turning of pages as the judge went through the evidence. Judge Sterling finally looked up from the documents. His expression was quite severe. Mr. Croft, stand up please. Darius stood up, but he was visibly trembling, shaking from head to toe. I have reviewed the preliminary evidence presented by the prosecutor. It is one of the most exhaustive and disturbing compilations I have ever seen in all my years of dealing with domestic violence cases. He paused for a moment. The recordings alone are more than sufficient to deny bail in this case. The explicit death threats, the documented pattern of coercive control, and the clear evidence of planning to discredit the victim if she ever sought help. All of this paints the portrait of an extremely dangerous individual. Randall tried to interrupt the judge. Your Honor, those recordings could have been easily edited or manipulated. The judge raised his hand to silence him. Counsel, you will have ample time to challenge the evidence at trial, but for the purposes of this bail hearing, I find there is sufficient probable cause to deny bail. He turned his gaze back to Darius. Mr. Croft, bail is denied. You will remain detained in the county jail until your trial. Furthermore, I am issuing a permanent restraining order, effective immediately. You cannot approach within 500 feet of the victim, her family, her workplace, or her residence. Any violation of this order will result in additional charges. Darius collapsed. He literally fell to the floor. Randall had to quickly move to hold him up. No, he stammered, clearly in shock. This can't be happening. I'm Darius Croft. I have rights. I have connections. This is a mistake. The judge banged the gavel loudly. Officer, remove the defendant from the courtroom. Two bailiffs approached Darius and handcuffed him. He continued mumbling incoherently, denying that his perfect world, built on lies and control, was finally collapsing all around him. They took him out of the room. His protests and shouts slowly faded down the hall. Aisha came over to me. It's a good start, definitely. But now comes the really hard part. Building the case for trial. But with all this evidence, I'm confident we'll get a conviction. I left the courtroom feeling something I hadn't felt in hours. Relief. It wasn't a victory yet, not by a long shot. The trial would be tough and it was coming soon. Darius's lawyers would try every trick in the book. But for now Skylar was safe. Darius was behind bars where he belonged. I walked through the courthouse hallways. I passed rooms where I had issued hundreds of sentences over the years. I saw my reflection in a window. I looked like I had aged 10 years in just one night, but my eyes held fire. Purpose. I wasn't finished yet. I immediately called Jordan. Darius won't be released. The judge denied bail. I heard a gasp of relief on the other end, followed by weeping. Skylar's crying, but they're tears of happiness. She says for the first time in 2 years she can actually breathe. My phone vibrated again. Unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered it. Judge Hayes. It was a woman's voice, young and trembling. Yes. Who is this? There was a pause. My name is Chloe. Chloe Wilson. I saw the news about Darius Croft, about his arrest. Something in her tone put me on high alert. How can I help you, Ms. Wilson? Another silence. Ragged breathing. I dated Darius 3 years ago before he even met your daughter, and he did the same thing to me. I closed my eyes tightly. Of course, abusers don't just suddenly start abusing. They have a history. They have a pattern of behavior. Do you want to talk about it, Chloe? I asked gently, trying to reassure her. I need to talk about it, Chloe said, her voice cracking with emotion. For 2 years I lived in absolute terror. He hit me. He controlled me. He had videos of me just like the ones they mentioned in the news. When I finally escaped, he threatened me. He said if I spoke up, he'd destroy my life, and I believed him. He had money, contacts, power. Her voice broke completely. But I never forgot. And when I saw that Darius was arrested, that someone finally believed one of his victims, I knew I had to speak up. I can't let him walk free. I can't let him do this to another woman. Chloe, I said firmly, your testimony could be absolutely crucial to our case. Would you be willing to testify in court? To give a formal statement to the police? She hesitated for a moment. Will they protect me? Darius has friends in high places, powerful people. If they know I spoke. We will protect you, I promise. And you are not alone in this. There are other victims out there. Together, you are stronger than any connection Darius has. Chloe took a deep breath. Okay, I'll do it. For your daughter, for myself, for all the women he's hurt. I gave her Aisha's phone number and told her to contact her immediately. I hung up, feeling chills run down my spine. How many more were there? How many women had Darius destroyed before Skylar? I returned to the hospital. Skylar was sound asleep. Jordan was reading a book in the chair next to the bed. How is she? I asked quietly. Quiet. After you told her about the bail being denied, she finally relaxed. The doctor said she could be released tomorrow if the control x-rays look good. I sat down and watched her sleep. My girl who had grown up way too fast, who had suffered way too much, but who had ultimately survived. My phone vibrated again. It was a text from Aisha. Estelle, I just spoke with Chloe Wilson. Her testimony is gold. It establishes a clear pattern of behavior. It shows Darius is a repeat offender. This greatly strengthens our case. I smiled. Are there more? I asked, though I honestly feared the answer. 2 more women called after seeing the news, Aisha replied. Both with similar stories. Darius met them, seduced them, and then the cycle of abuse, control, and violence began. Threats, extortion with intimate material. The exact same tactics. I felt sick to my stomach. 5 known victims. How many more were too afraid to speak up? We need to bring them together, I said. All of them. Let them meet each other. Let them know they aren't alone in this. Aisha agreed immediately. I'll organize a meeting. But Estelle, there's something else. Randall Quinn has resigned from the case. I straightened up in my chair. What? He just filed a formal withdrawal? Why? That was completely unexpected. Randall never abandoned high-profile cases. He loved the attention, the money, and the fame. Why would he do that now? I asked, puzzled. Aisha laughed, but without any humor. Because one of the videos on Darius's computer implicates him. Apparently, Randall knew about the intimate material. In fact, he helped Darius create the extortion plan. He's cited in emails discussing strategies to silence the victims. My jaw clenched tightly. So, Randall is an accomplice? Exactly. And now he faces his own investigation by the State Bar Association. He could lose his license to practice law. Justice. Finally. Who will defend Darius now? I asked. He was assigned a public defender, a young but competent attorney, but without Randall's vast resources or connections. That was good news for us. It meant Darius couldn't simply buy his way out of trouble. He couldn't use influence or money to manipulate the system. He was leveled vulnerable, just as he had made all of his victims feel for so long. The following days were a complete whirlwind. Skylar was released from the hospital and moved in temporarily with me. She couldn't go back to that condo, not yet. Maybe never. Jordan took time off work to be with her sister and provide support. We organized therapy, support groups, and safe spaces where Skylar could begin to heal from her trauma. Aisha organized the meeting with the other victims. It was held in a private room at the district attorney's office. When Skylar walked in and saw the other 4 women, Chloe Wilson, Danielle Brooks, and the 2 others, something profound happened. Recognition. They didn't know each other, but they immediately recognized each other. In each other's eyes, they saw their own pain and suffering reflected back at them. Chloe was the first to speak. I thought I was the only one. I honestly thought there was something wrong with me, that I somehow provoked his violence. The others nodded in agreement, understanding exactly what she meant. One by one they shared their stories. The specific details were slightly different, but the overall pattern was absolutely identical. Darius chose strong, intelligent, successful women and then systematically destroyed them from the inside out. Skylar listened to every story with tears streaming down her cheeks. When it was finally her turn to speak, her voice was barely a whisper. Thank you. Thank you for being so brave, for speaking up, because now I know I'm not crazy, that it wasn't my fault. The 5 women embraced each other, strangers brought together by shared trauma, but also by shared hope. By the promise that this time the system would not fail them. This time the abuser would finally pay for what he had done. Aisha watched from the back of the room, a slight smile on her face. When they finished, she approached the group. Ladies, what you have here is incredibly powerful. 5 independent testimonies, 5 stories that follow the exact same pattern. This is not a coincidence. This is clear evidence of a serial predator. Preparation for the trial began in earnest. Depositions, interviews, evidence review. Every single day brought new discoveries, more videos, more documents, more irrefutable proof of the systematic nature of Darius's abuse. The public defender tried to negotiate a plea deal. He offered for Darius to plead guilty to lesser charges in exchange for a significantly reduced sentence. Aisha flatly refused. We're going to trial and we are going to win. 2 months later, the trial began. The courtroom was absolutely packed. Reporters, activists, and domestic violence survivors came to show their support. Skylar sat in the front row with Jordan and me. She was visibly trembling, but she was there, strong and determined to see justice done. Darius entered the courtroom in handcuffs. There was nothing left of the elegant, sophisticated man I had initially met. The time in jail had definitely changed him. He had sunken eyes and a gaunt face. But what had changed the most was his posture. There was no longer any arrogance, only defeat. Aisha presented the state's case with surgical precision. The audio recordings were played for the jury, the medical testimonies were presented, and the videos were described in detail without actually showing them publicly to protect the victims from further harm. Every single piece of evidence was a nail in Darius's coffin. The public defender did what he could, given the circumstances. He tried to argue that the recordings were taken out of context, that the injuries could have other possible explanations, but it was completely useless. The evidence against Darius was overwhelming. The most powerful moment of the trial came when Skylar took the witness stand. The entire courtroom fell completely silent. She walked with her head held high with newfound confidence. She was no longer the broken woman from that morning at the precinct. She was a survivor. Aisha guided her gently through her testimony. Can you tell us, Ms. Hayes, when the abuse began? Skylar took a deep breath. About 3 months after we got married. It was something relatively small at first. A push, then a slap, always followed by profuse apologies, flowers, and promises that it would never happen again. But it always happened. And each time it was worse than the last. Why didn't you leave sooner? Aisha asked. It was the question everyone always asks. The question that never truly understands the complexity of abuse and coercive control. Skylar looked directly at the jury, making eye contact with each of them. Because I was terrified. Because Darius controlled everything. My money, my friends, my job. He systematically isolated me until I felt like I had nowhere else to go. And when I finally gathered the courage to plan my escape, he found the recordings I had secretly made. He threatened to completely destroy me if I spoke up. He said he had friends in important places, and that no one would ever believe me. Her voice cracked with emotion. And he was almost right. When I called the police that night, they believed him, not me. The public defender rose to begin his cross-examination. He tried to be aggressive and confrontational. "Isn't it true that you have a history of anxiety, Ms. Hayes?" Skylar nodded slowly. "Yes, I developed severe anxiety after months and months of living in constant terror and fear." "And isn't it also true that you sought psychiatric help?" "Yes, because my husband was mentally destroying me." The defender tried another angle of attack. "Isn't it possible that some of these injuries were accidental? Perhaps you simply fell down the stairs?" Skylar stared directly at him, her eyes blazing. "Accidental cigarette burns? Accidental broken ribs? Accidental ligature marks around my neck?" Her voice rose with each question. "No, none of it was accidental. It was all deliberate, calculated, and designed to completely break me down as a human being." The lawyer quickly backed down, realizing he had made a mistake. He had no more questions for the witness. Skylar left the stand and walked back to her seat. When she passed Darius, he tried to look at her, to intimidate her with his gaze. She didn't return his stare. He no longer had any power over her. Then came the other victims. One by one, they took the stand and bravely told their stories. Chloe spoke of how Darius had isolated her from her family and friends. How he had convinced her that no one would ever love her as much as he did. How, when she finally escaped, he stalked her relentlessly for months. Another victim, Danielle Brooks, described how Darius had deliberately ruined her career. He had contacted her boss with lies and malicious rumors, sabotaged important projects, and ultimately gotten her fired just to prove that he could control every single aspect of her life. The pattern was undeniable. 5 women, 5 almost identical stories, all describing the same horrific cycle of seduction, isolation, control, violence, and threats. The jury listened intently with increasingly somber expressions. Some even had tears in their eyes. Aisha then presented the digital evidence. A forensic expert explained in detail how Darius had kept meticulous files of compromising material on each of his victims, how he had used technology to spy on them and track their movements, and how he had built a complete system designed to keep them trapped and silent. "This is not an ordinary domestic violence case," Aisha said in her closing arguments. "This is the case of a serial predator who used his position, his money, and his connections to systematically victimize vulnerable women." She walked slowly in front of the jury, making eye contact with each member. Darius Croft did not simply lose control in moments of rage. He exerted absolute control over his victims. He carefully planned, documented, and executed a consistent pattern of abuse that repeated itself with 5 known victims for years. She pointed to the boxes of evidence stacked high in the courtroom, the recordings they had all listened to, the medical reports they had seen, and the testimonies they had heard. Everything points to a man who knew exactly what he was doing, and who did it again and again without any remorse whatsoever. She turned and looked directly at Darius, her voice filled with disdain. The defendant had multiple opportunities to stop this horrific behavior. Every time a victim managed to escape, he simply found another one to replace her. Every time someone tried to report him to the authorities, he used his influence and money to silence them. Until that fateful morning when his carefully constructed plan finally failed. Aisha walked back to stand in front of the jury once again. Because this time the victim had a mother who knew how the system worked, a former judge who knew every single tactic Darius would try to use, and who was not going to allow another woman to be destroyed by this monster. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. But it shouldn't be necessary to have a judge as a mother in order to get justice. It shouldn't be necessary to have 5 victims speaking out in order to be believed. One victim should be enough. One credible testimony should be enough. And this evidence, she gestured to the boxes again, is more than enough to declare Darius Croft guilty on all counts. The public defender did his best to try and salvage the situation. He argued that Darius had severe anger management issues and needed treatment, not prison. He claimed that the circumstances were far more complex than they seemed on the surface. But his words sounded hollow and unconvincing, even to him. He had no real answer for the damning audio recordings, no plausible explanation for the repeated pattern of abuse, and absolutely no defense against the overwhelming mountain of evidence. The jury retired to deliberate. We waited 3 hours, then 4, then 5. Every single minute felt like an eternity. Skylar squeezed my hand tightly, her knuckles white. "What if they find him not guilty?" she whispered, her voice filled with fear. "They won't," I assured her, trying to sound confident. "The evidence against him is too clear, too overwhelming." But deep down I was still afraid. I had seen solid cases fall apart for no good reason. I had seen the guilty walk free far too many times. I had seen the system fail countless victims. Finally, after 6 agonizing hours, the jury returned to the courtroom. We all stood up, bracing ourselves for the verdict. The jury foreman, an older man with a serious expression, held the paper containing the verdict in his trembling hands. Judge Sterling spoke, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom. "Has the jury reached a verdict in this case?" "Yes, Your Honor, we have." "How do you find the defendant on the charge of aggravated assault?" The jury foreman looked directly at Darius, his gaze unwavering. "Guilty." A collective gasp filled the courtroom as the word was spoken. "On the charge of felony battery." "How do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." "On the charge of continuous domestic abuse." "How do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." One by one, every single charge against Darius was read aloud, and each time the answer was the same. "Guilty. Guilty. Guilty." Darius finally collapsed in his seat, completely defeated. His lawyer tried to comfort him, but it was a futile effort. His world had officially come to an end. Skylar broke down in sobs of relief. Jordan wrapped her arms around her sister, holding her tight. The other victims in the courtroom also cried, but not out of sadness or despair. They cried out of relief, out of validation, and out of justice finally being served. Judge Sterling banged his gavel loudly. "Sentencing will be delivered in 2 weeks." We left the courtroom, blinking in the bright sunlight. Outside, a throng of reporters waited, eager to get their sound bites. Aisha gave a brief statement to the press. Today the system worked as it should. 5 brave women spoke up and a serial predator was finally found guilty of his heinous crimes. This verdict sends a very clear message. Domestic abuse will not be tolerated in our society, no matter who you are, and no matter how much money or power you may have. Skylar also spoke, her voice trembling but clear and strong. "I want other victims to know that you are not alone in this, that your voices matter, and that justice is possible. It may take time and it may be hard, but it exists and you deserve to have it." The 2 weeks leading up to the sentencing hearing passed quickly. Skylar began the long and difficult process of rebuilding her life. She went back to her job, a job that she loved and excelled at. She found a new apartment, small but safe, in a secure building. Jordan helped her move her belongings. I helped her decorate the new apartment, trying to make it feel like home. The day of the sentencing finally arrived. The courtroom was packed once again, even more crowded than before. Darius was brought in handcuffs. He looked completely defeated and broken, a shell of his former self. Judge Sterling reviewed the documents in front of him, then looked directly at Darius. "Mr. Croft, you have been found guilty of multiple serious charges. I have carefully reviewed the pre-sentence reports, and I have considered the systematic nature of your crimes, the coldness and calculated cruelty with which you victimized multiple women for years. You used your position and resources to cause immeasurable harm to your victims. You destroyed lives and traumatized women who trusted you, and you did it without any remorse whatsoever." He paused for a moment, then continued. "Therefore, I sentence you to 25 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for the first 15 years. Furthermore, You must register as a violent offender for the rest of your life. The gavel fell with a loud thud, sealing Darius's fate. Final and definitive 25 years. Darius was 42 years old. He would be an old man when he finally got out of prison, if he ever got out. Skylar closed her eyes tightly. Tears ran freely down her face, but this time she was smiling through them. Jordan and I wrapped our arms around her, holding her close. It was finally over. 6 months later, life had settled into a new rhythm. Skylar had moved permanently into her new apartment, a bright and cheerful place on the 3rd floor with large windows that let in plenty of sunlight. No shadows, no dark corners where fear could hide. Jordan visited her every weekend. They cooked together, laughed, and healed. I went over on Wednesdays. We drank coffee on her small balcony and talked about everything and nothing. We talked about future plans and long-forgotten dreams that were slowly beginning to revive. One Tuesday afternoon, Skylar called me. "Mom, can you come over? There's something I want to show you." Her voice sounded different, lighter and more carefree than I had heard it in years. I arrived at her apartment in about 20 minutes. When she opened the door, she was smiling. A real smile, not forced or feigned, but a genuine smile that came from deep within her soul. "Look," she said, leading me into her living room. On the table were some papers. I recognized them immediately. The divorce decree, finally signed, processed, and sealed. It arrived in the mail today. It's official. I'm no longer married to him. She picked up the papers, her hands no longer trembling. "I'm free, Mom. Legally and officially free." I hugged her tightly, feeling her body completely relax in my arms for the first time in years. "I am so incredibly proud of you," I whispered in her ear. "Of your strength, your courage, and of how you survived this nightmare." She pulled away, wiping away tears of happiness. "I didn't just survive, Mom. I'm living. Really living. For the first time since I met Darius." She sat down on the sofa and patted the seat next to her, inviting me to sit down. "I've started writing a book about my experience. Aisha told me that it could help other women who have gone through similar situations, that my story could potentially make a difference in their lives." She smiled shyly. "I don't know if it will be any good, but I need to get it all out of me. I need to turn the pain into something useful." I sat down next to her and put my arm around her shoulders. "It will be more than good, honey. It will be important because it comes from the truth, from your real experience." Skylar nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "And I've started giving talks at women's shelters and at colleges, talking about the red flags to look out for, and about how abuse doesn't always start with physical violence. Sometimes it starts with isolation, with control, and with making you doubt yourself and your own sanity. The other victims are healing too," she continued. "Chloe has opened a non-profit organization to help other survivors of domestic violence. Danielle has gone back to college to finish her degree. We are all rebuilding our lives together." She took my hand and squeezed it tightly. "And it all started because you didn't give up on me. Because when I called you that morning, you came running. You fought for me. You didn't let the system fail me." I squeezed her hand in return. I did what any mother would do for her child. She shook her head slowly. "No, Mom, you did what an exceptional mother does. You used your knowledge, your experience, your strength, and you saved my life." We sat together in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only exists when there are no more secrets, when all the pain has been exposed to the light, and is finally beginning to heal. My phone vibrated, breaking the silence. It was a text from Jordan. "Are you two together? I'm on my way over. I have some news to share." She arrived about 30 minutes later with a bottle of non-alcoholic wine and a radiant smile on her face. "Remember that I filed a formal complaint against Captain Cole?" she asked. We had almost forgotten about it. With everything that had happened with Darius, the investigation into the captain had been sidelined and put on the back burner. "Well, he was suspended without pay pending a full investigation for negligence and favoritism. And they're now reviewing other cases that he handled in the past, cases where he might have let abusers go free because they were his friends. It was justice. Late but real nonetheless." The system hadn't just failed Skylar. It had failed dozens of other women as well, because a man in a position of power had prioritized personal friendship over his sworn duty to uphold the law. And there's more good news, Jordan continued, unable to contain her excitement. Randall Quinn permanently lost his license to practice law. The ethics board found that he actively helped cover up crimes, not just with Darius, but with other clients as well. I smiled. The pieces of the puzzle kept falling into place. Not only had the abuser paid the price for his crimes, but his enablers and facilitators were finally facing the consequences of their actions as well. It should have been this way from the very beginning, but better late than never. We drank non-alcoholic wine, ate a delicious pie that Jordan had brought, and talked about normal things, movies, books, and vacation plans. For the first time in years, we were just a normal family without crisis, without fear, just three women who loved each other, sharing a quiet and peaceful afternoon together. When the sun began to set, I walked out onto the balcony to get some fresh air. I looked out at the city, spreading out toward the horizon, with lights beginning to turn on in the buildings. I wondered how many of those windows hid the kind of horror that Skylar had lived through. How many women were out there right now, scared, trapped, and not knowing that there was a way out. Skylar joined me on the balcony, wrapping her arms around my waist. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" she asked quietly. "All the others," I answered honestly. "The women who don't have a former judge as a mother, who don't have sisters to collect evidence, who are facing what you faced all alone." Skylar looked out at the city too, her eyes filled with compassion. "That's why I'm writing the book, and that's why I give talks, because I want them to know that they aren't alone in this world, that there's help available, and that there's always hope for a better future." Hope. She turned to me and said, "You know what the strangest thing is? For months I thought that if Darius went to prison I would feel vengeful like I'd won. But that's not how I feel at all." I asked her, "What do you feel?" She thought about it for a moment before answering. "Peace. Just peace. Because I don't have to constantly look over my shoulder anymore. I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not. I don't have to live in constant fear that someone will find out my secret." She smiled softly, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I feel like myself again, like the Skylar I was before Darius came into my life. But I'm stronger now because I know what I'm capable of. I know I can survive the worst things imaginable and keep going, keep living." I hugged her tightly. My girl had walked through hell and come out on the other side. She wasn't unscathed, of course. The scars were there, and they would probably always be there, but they no longer defined who she was. They were a part of her story, but they didn't control her anymore. That night driving home, my mind replayed everything that had happened over the past few months. The phone call at 2:37 in the morning that had completely changed the course of our lives. The precinct where Miles recognized my face and realized the monumental mistake he had made. Darius sitting in that office, putting on his mask of the perfect, innocent victim. The recordings that finally exposed the truth for everyone to see. The other victims who found the courage to come forward and speak their truth. The verdict that finally brought justice, however delayed. And Skylar, slowly but surely rebuilding her life piece by piece. I had a fundamental realization that night. For 34 years as a judge, I had dedicated my life to protecting women. I had handed down sentences. I had issued restraining orders to keep them safe. I had changed lives, hopefully for the better. But no sentence I had ever given mattered as much to me as this one did. Because this time it wasn't just another case on my docket. It was my daughter, my own flesh and blood. The person I loved more than anything in the world. And I had learned that all the knowledge and experience in the world mean absolutely nothing if you can't use them to protect the people you love most. That morning at the precinct, when I pushed open that door and saw the fear in Miles's eyes, I wasn't there as a judge. I was there as a mother. I was a mother who wasn't going to stand by and let the system fail her daughter. A mother who was willing to fight against every obstacle, every corrupt connection, every manipulation tactic, until she got justice for her child. And in the end, that fierce maternal love was enough. Not because I was special or had some kind of unfair advantage, but because the truth is a powerful force, especially when it is finally given a voice. I arrived at my house. It was quiet and empty, but I didn't feel lonely. I knew that miles away, Skylar was finally sleeping in peace for the first time in years. Jordan was excitedly planning her next visit, eager to see her sister and support her healing process. The other victims were still healing from the trauma they had endured, but they were on the right path. And Darius was finally where he belonged, paying the price for every single life he had destroyed. I poured myself a cup of tea, settled into my favorite armchair, closed my eyes and understood the most important lesson of my entire career. It's not about revenge. It was never about revenge. It's about protection. It's about making sure that victims can sleep soundly at night without fear. It's about giving them a voice when the world tries to silence them and minimize their pain. It's about being there to advocate for them when the system fails to protect them. Because sometimes the system does fail, but mothers don't. The true protectors never give up. And that morning when my daughter desperately needed me, I was there for her. And that made all the difference in the world. You know, after everything that happened, I realized something profound. Justice isn't just a word you hear in a courtroom. It's a feeling, a heartbeat. It's the courage to stand up and keep fighting, even when life knocks you down over and over again. Sometimes the system breaks, but love, persistence, and truth have the power to rebuild it, stronger than before. I learned that even when everything seems completely hopeless and lost, there's always a way back, if we keep fighting for it, if we refuse to give up. If you ever feel trapped, voiceless, or powerless, remember this. Silence protects no one. But speaking up, telling your story can save lives, even your own. And if my story resonated with you, maybe it's because you too believe that strength is born from pain, and that true healing begins the moment we stop hiding and start being honest with ourselves and the world. If you agree with me and enjoyed my story, show it by sending a like. Let's see our numbers grow and connect with even more people who need to hear this message. I'm curious to know which city you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Write it in the comments. If you want to support my journey and help me continue sharing these stories, you can send a small donation. Thank you for listening and sharing your precious time with me. For more inspiring life stories like this one, you can check out the other videos on my channel and subscribe. On the screen there are links to 2 new life stories that I'm sure you'll find compelling and thought-provoking. Click on one and start listening now.